Destroyer HMS Defender is being shadowed by Russian vessels and circled by jets carrying live weapons. A Russian voice has already come over the radio with a warning. The crew is suiting up in flash gear and moving to battle stations. It's June 2021 in the Black Sea, 12 miles off the coast of Crimea. HMS Defender carries hidden missile systems and a radar that can track 1,000 objects at once up to the edge of space. On paper, she can handle this. But she's alone, and Russia isn't bluffing. Nobody on board knows yet, but every Russian move that day had been predicted, word for word, before Defender even left port. And that secret would soon come to light at a bus stop in Kent. Ever since the United Kingdom lost 2 of its prized Type 42 units to Argentina during the Falklands War, the nation knew it needed to up its game with a new breed of air defenders. Not only would this next generation need to be equipped with robust damage control systems and a more aggressive missile suite, but it would also have to possess the most advanced technology out of any British destroyer to date. These ships required the ability to track any and all potential threats, so no missile could ever sucker punch a UK fleet again. However, whenever the United Kingdom tried to get its new naval warriors off the dock, something always went wrong. The first hiccup came in the mid-1980s, shortly after the Falklands War ended. Several nations came together for the NATO frigate replacement for the 1990s, or NFR-90, a program set to design a new class of warships for use across multiple navies and ensure the ultimate protection of the seas. The idea had potential. There was only one small problem. No nation could agree on what this new vessel needed to be. For instance, some collaborators wanted the Boeing AGM-84 Harpoon to be the ship's primary weapon. This was a solid choice, and many NATO members already fancied these missiles as the top payload for arming their existing vessels. Certain earlier versions of the Harpoon could cover as much as 150 miles and possessed re-attack capabilities, meaning that if, upon launch, contact with its target was lost, the missile could automatically fly an autonomous pattern across the area until it locked onto the threat again. Still, some nations thought NATO could do better. France instead suggested equipping the new warship with the Exocet missile, which conveniently was French-built. To be fair, this was still not a bad choice. While some mid-1980s versions of the missile, like the MM-38, could only cover a fraction of the Harpoon's range at 26 miles, the Exocet had the key advantage of being a particularly effective sea skimmer. By flying only a few feet above the water upon deployment, the rocket could reportedly approach its target undetected until it was too close to counter. Britain itself had experienced how lethal these missiles could be during the Falklands War, when the destroyer HMS Sheffield was sunk by one of them. Still, the United Kingdom was not quite sold on the French proposal. One key concern for the nation was that while most countries were discussing which missile system the new warship should carry, there was not enough emphasis on defense systems to neutralize short-range threats. And so, before the warship could even begin assembly, Britain walked away. The next attempt to secure a new destroyer did not arrive until the 1990s. This time, Britain would collaborate with only 2 other countries, Italy and France. Almost immediately, the 3 agreed on the fundamentals of what they needed: an air defender equipped with the principal anti-air missile system, also known as the Sea Viper, a cutting-edge defense suite that paired powerful radars with lethal missiles for maximum protection. However, problems soon arose again. While France and Italy now agreed that close-range protection was paramount, Britain wanted to have it both ways. The nation needed a vessel that could defend itself against enemies sailing nearby in the event it found itself embroiled in a coastal conflict, but it also needed the ability to engage threats looming beyond the horizon in case war carried the nation into open waters. Neither France nor Italy was going to invest in a radar system advanced enough to fulfill the British demand, and so, by the end of the decade, the UK was parting ways with its partners once again. By now it was clear that if the Royal Navy was ever going to get its destroyer, it would have to build it itself. The process would be costly and slow, yet officials believed that in the end it would all be worth it. They had to. The concept for the Type 45, or Daring-class destroyers, was officially born in late 1999 under the helm of defense company BAE Systems. It was originally estimated that the new family of vessels would take about 7 years to arrive and cost Britain somewhere around £4.9 billion, roughly $8 billion at the exchange rate of the time, and around $15.6 billion when adjusted for inflation today. For that price, the nation expected to get at least a dozen of these new warships in the water. However, as costs skyrocketed, over $1 billion past the agreed-upon price, and production lines staggered, the best contractors could ultimately deliver was 6 units. Needless to say, officials were not happy. By now, it had been over 25 years since the UK had begun searching for a replacement for its 14-ship fleet of Type 42 destroyers, and all it had to show for it were 6 overpriced vessels, equipped with an ambitious technology suite that had yet to prove itself in combat. The moment of truth came toward the start of the 2010s, when the first ships of the class had finally entered service, and the Royal Navy could determine whether the engineer's final design truly justified the cost. Even before setting sail, few could deny that the Daring-class destroyers were impressive just to watch. Measuring 500 feet in length, capable of accommodating a crew of up to 285, and displacing up to 8,500 tons at full load, they were officially the largest escort destroyers the United Kingdom had ever sent to sea. However, size means little without the firepower to back it up. Luckily for the Royal Navy, engineers had not disappointed in that department. For naval gunnery, the class carried 2 7.62mm miniguns, 2 DS-30B Mark I 30mm rapid-fire cannons, 6 general-purpose machine guns, 2 automated phalanx 20mm closed-in weapon systems, and 1 intimidating 113mm Mark VIII naval gun mounted at the bow. These weapons provided layered defensive protection and surface strike capability against nearby threats. Yet the time when the Daring class really shone was when it used its radar and attack system. Engineers had revived the Sea Viper defense system, which had been previously developed alongside France and Italy. They enhanced it by pairing it with a radar system comprising 2 panels housed in a spherical dome mounted atop a 130-foot tall tower. The system, called Samson, was capable of detecting threats up to 250 miles away and reporting precise targeting data to neutralize incoming targets using the onboard array of Aster-15 and Aster-30 missiles, with ranges from 1.1 miles up to 74.6 miles. Though the ships of the class had space to launch up to 48 missiles, few would suspect it from their deceivingly clean surfaces. Every vertical launch shell sat below deck, sealed beneath flush hatches that open only at the moment of firing, protecting both the systems and the crew from exposure in the event of a strike. Once launched, the Astra missiles would leave little margin for escape, guided not only by their own active radar seekers, but also by the formidable Samson radar, which, just like engineers hoped for, immediately became the crown jewel of Britain's modern air defense strategy. Referred to by the Royal Navy as the all-seeing eye, or simply the spiky ball, due to the lightning rods crowning its radar dome, the Samson system is not only capable of identifying targets hundreds of miles around the vessel, but also those hovering directly above her. It's said it can even track objects positioned as high as the edge of the outer atmosphere. According to reports, Samson can track as many as 1,000 objects, as small as a cricket ball, traveling at speeds of up to 2,300 miles per hour. In the event that the system were to fail, the Daring class is also equipped with the backup S-1850M radar, a powerful system in its own right, said to remain effective even against stealth targets. However, because Samson features adaptive waveform control, which is designed to make it highly resistant to enemy jamming, it's unlikely that the S-1850M would ever need to carry the burden alone. The idea of tracking thousands of objects at once may sound overwhelming for the crew, but the ship and her personnel rely on highly sophisticated methods to discriminate between harmless contacts and genuine threats. One of the first layers of defense is at least partially human. Personnel are tasked with visually identifying any recognizable objects and inputting them directly into the command system, ensuring that neither the vessel nor the crew waste time pursuing false targets. The next layer belongs to the ship's computers. Imagine a missile is racing toward a Type 45 destroyer. Samson will not only detect the incoming threat, but also analyze its precise trajectory to determine whether it's actually on course to strike the ship. Once it's confirmed that a threat is inbound, the system alerts the crew, identifies which missile to fire, and opens the specific hatch to release it. However, the rocket will not fire immediately. Instead, it will wait until the exact time to go off, ensuring its trajectory cuts down the enemy payload just where the crew wants it to. With all of these systems in place, by the time the 6 ships of the class formally entered service, there was little doubt they were among the most technologically advanced warships ever assembled, not just in Britain, but anywhere in the world. Yet despite their impressive capabilities, none of them were immediately required to unleash their full potential. Throughout the 2010s, the Daring class largely served in escort roles, protecting commercial convoys and carrier groups. Most of the combat action they experienced came during exercises, live fire tests, and the occasional interception of suspected hostile drones. But then, in mid-2021, one of the ships in the family suddenly found herself at the center of one of the most tense naval confrontations Britain had faced in a long time, a moment when missiles from two opposing nations were locked onto each other, and the possibility of igniting a new global conflict felt closer than ever. The enemy was Russia. Back in 2014, tensions between the two nations had escalated after Vladimir Putin launched the annexation of the Crimean Peninsula, territory still recognized by much of the international community as part of Ukraine to this day. At the time, Prime Minister David Cameron's government condemned the military move, and British officials labeled the Russian-staged referendum used to legitimize the annexation as illegal. However, neither the UK nor other UN members criticizing Russia were willing to escalate the situation by drawing their weapons. 7 years later, however, Britain was no longer content to simply sit and watch. The full-scale invasion of Ukraine's mainland had not yet begun, but whispers of Putin's next move were already rumbling across Europe. The UK understood that if it hoped to prevent another successful Russian land grab, it would need to act fast. On June 21, 2021, HMS Defender, the second youngest member of the Daring class, sailed into the Ukrainian port of Odessa. Her mission was diplomatic on the surface, to formalize a naval cooperation agreement designed to bolster Ukraine's maritime defenses before Moscow could make another move. Under the pact, Britain would supply mine hunters, assist in building new missile-capable warships, provide weapons and training, and help construct a new naval base intended to become the Ukrainian Navy's primary fleet headquarters. Certainly, Moscow was displeased. However, what truly sent the Kremlin into a rage came 2 days later. To show Putin just how seriously the nation was taking its commitment to help defend Ukraine, Britain dispatched Defender on a calculated follow-up mission as she departed Odessa. The objective was not open confrontation, at least not yet. Instead, the destroyer would sail near the Crimean Peninsula under the banner of a freedom of navigation patrol. On paper, there was no justification for escalation. Britain had issued no threats, and under international law, the waters in question were recognized as Ukrainian. But of course, Moscow did not see it that way. Defender had barely cleared port when the tension began to build. Roughly 12 miles off Crimea's coastline, the crew spotted a Russian warship shadowing their every movement. Above them, 2 military jets sliced through the sky, flying low enough for those on deck to feel the rumble of their engines in their bones. The atmosphere shifted instantly. Every sailor aboard was battle-trained. Still, no one was eager to enter a confrontation with Russia if it could be avoided. When the communications line rang, more than one sailor must have hoped it would be the British command ordering an immediate turn back. It wasn't. Instead, a Russian voice, heavy with accent, came through the channel, leaving no doubt about the seriousness of the situation as it declared, quote, "If you don't change course, I'll fire." Defender, however, was not willing to be pushed aside so easily. Personnel were ordered to their stations at once. The crew manning the ship's combat systems slid into position behind their screens, one eye fixed on their electronic displays, the other scanning the horizon, tracking the Russian vessel stalking them across the water. The weapons teams wasted no time. On deck, ammunition belts were fed into the smaller surface guns, while heavy shells were loaded one by one into the larger mounts. If the Russians fired, the British would be ready to answer them from every angle. With defenses reinforced, the destroyer pressed forward. But the Russians were not bluffing. For every knot Defender gained, the opposing ships edged closer, narrowing the distance between both hulls. Eventually, the Russians drew close enough for visual confirmation. The vessel shadowing them was identified as a Rubin-class patrol boat, a relatively modern Russian platform, not typically deployed as a frontline attacker, and smaller than a Daring-class destroyer. Still, it carried enough firepower to make every sailor aboard Defender uneasy. The primary offensive weapon of the Rubin class consists of a 30mm AK-630M rotary cannon. While originally designed as a close-in anti-aircraft system, it's proven equally dangerous against surface targets, capable of spewing up to 5,000 rounds of explosive shells per minute. Built for short-range engagements, it has an effective range of roughly 16,000 feet. However, out in the Black Sea, that distance was shrinking fast. Reports indicate the Russian patrol boat eventually maneuvered to within just 328 feet of Defender's hull. Footage released by the Russians after the incident shows the patrol boats getting just close enough to see every stripe on the flags flying across HMS Defender's deck, as well as the faces of the lookouts keeping an eye on them. The maneuver could have been interpreted as a textbook intimidation tactic, a calculated attempt to force a course correction without firing a shot. But no one aboard Defender was willing to assume it was only that. Not when the patrol boat was also presumed to be carrying 8 9K-38 Igla infrared-guided missiles and 2 pedestal-mounted 12 7mm Cord machine guns, all well within striking range. And the situation was only about to get worse, as not long after initial contact, it was confirmed that a second Russian vessel was closing in as well. Defender had a set of gas turbines and electric motors, which gave her a speed advantage of about 5 knots over her chasers. However, not even that seemed to be enough to give the British room enough to breathe, as the radar systems on board soon confirmed that besides the 2 Russian ships, Defender was also facing around 20 Russian aircraft circling overhead. Suddenly, the pressure was coming from sea and sky alike, and Britain's top destroyer didn't feel invincible anymore. Images from the incident reveal that at least one Russian Navy BE-12 maritime patrol aircraft, an unarmed surveillance platform, was present over the scene. However, the aerial formation was far from harmless. Other aircraft circling HMS Defender appeared to be carrying live ordnance. Most notably, a Russian Navy Su-24M strike jet was filmed slicing low across the destroyer's path, close enough for analysts to identify what looked like 2 unguided bombs mounted beneath its wings. The Su-24M, however, carries more than just bombs. It's also equipped with an internal 23mm GSH-6 23M rotary cannon, capable of unleashing up to 500 rounds in a matter of seconds. If its pilots chose to dive and strafe Defender's deck, they had the means to do so. And it seemed the Russians were prepared to escalate at any moment. Footage captured from Russian aircraft, and possibly drones deployed to the area, shows jets flying close enough to the destroyer to make out the rotation of her S-1850M radar. At times, the aircraft appeared to maneuver in ways that suggested targeting runs, their systems even seemingly locking onto the lone warship below. With all these threats around the ship, the situation aboard Defender only grew more tense by the second. Personnel were ordered to put on flash protection, covering exposed skin and fire-resistant gear while continuing to operate the ship's combat systems. Radar operators tracked every movement in the sky. Weapons crews monitored the Russian patrol vessels off the bow. Every man and woman aboard understood that if a single bomb or burst of cannon fire struck home, the deck could erupt into chaos within seconds. HMS Defender had been built to withstand short-range assaults. On paper, her Sea Viper system was more than capable of countering incoming threats, but she'd never been tested in a standoff quite like this. Surrounded on nearly all sides by a rival power that even without its most advanced weapons could unleash a torrent of fire, powerful enough to push the destroyer's defenses to their absolute limits. Now all that remained was for someone to make the first move, to discover just how much a daring-class destroyer could endure. In the footage captured from inside the Rubin-class patrol boats, the British crew can be heard attempting to defuse the situation before the first salvos are fired. Over the radio, a calm but firm British voice states, quote, "We're conducting innocent passage. We have the right to do so, in accordance with international law and the United Nations Convention on the Law of the Sea. Your actions are unsafe, unprofessional, and endanger both of our vessels. Are you threatening me?" For several minutes, the exchange continues, measured words layered over rising tension. Then the Russians appear to lose patience. At first, it seems as though Defender is being allowed to continue on her course. But just as it appears she may slip away without further escalation, The AK-630M cannon, mounted on the bow of the Russian patrol boat, elevates and fires. 3 bursts crack across the water, the tracers vanishing almost as quickly as they appear. It remains impossible to determine how close the rounds came to Defender's hull. What is known, however, and what remains debated among military observers, is the initial British response. The Royal Navy initially stated that no warning shots had been fired at their ship, and it wasn't until later that they admitted shots had been fired, though British officials maintained they were well out of range and posed no direct threat. According to the Royal Navy, despite being shadowed by an armed patrol boat and military aircraft, the gunfire was assessed as part of a previously announced Russian gunnery exercise in the wider area, not an attack directed at Defender herself, which is why they didn't initially report the strikes. Russia, for its part, maintained not only that these were indeed warning shots aimed at the British, but that they escalated their warnings even further. According to them, at one point, at least one Russian Su-24M dropped warning bombs ahead of the British ship's path. That claim, however, lacks sufficient conclusive public evidence to confirm that it actually occurred. British transit logs and official statements indicate that the HMS Defender maintained her course throughout the entire encounter, so even if the Russians were making bombs rain around the destroyer, she was not intimidated enough to alter her intended path. Some analysts have suggested that while footage and reports from journalists aboard HMS Defender seemed to indicate the crew was fully expecting Russia to take action at any moment, the destroyer's relatively calm tone after the encounter may have been a carefully calculated move, serving a dual purpose. On one hand, the fact that the destroyer maintained her course and refused to steer away from Crimea's coast sent a clear signal to Moscow that Britain was not intimidated by Russia's fleet. On the other hand, the decision to downplay the alleged warning shots fired at the British by Russian forces may itself have been a subtle provocation, perhaps an attempt to pressure Moscow into making a rash move that could have turned the international community against it. And if that truly was the strategy, Britain appeared to have succeeded. Because even after HMS Defender had sailed away from Crimea's coast, Russia showed no sign of letting the situation go. Just one day after the Black Sea incident, the Russians turned their anger toward yet another foreign vessel. This time, the target was the Dutch frigate HMS Evertsen. According to accounts from the former Dutch Minister of Defense, Arik Bijleveld-Schouten, the crew was patrolling the area when the same ominous roar of low-flying jet engines that HMS Defender's sailors had heard the day before suddenly echoed across the deck. It remains unclear exactly how many aircraft were involved, but reports suggest that at least a pair, an armed Su-30 fighter and an Su-24 bomber, began circling Evertsen like vultures. The Dutch warship was not that much smaller than Defender and carried a respectable array of naval guns and missiles. However, its overall defensive systems were still not quite as sophisticated as those aboard the British destroyer, and if the Russians struck, there would have been little the crew could do to avoid at least one heavy hit. Every crew member rushed to their stations. Radar operators must have been working furiously to track the Russian aircraft and determine their exact position. But it did not take long before electronic systems aboard Evertsen began to malfunction. The Russians were jamming the ship. The risk quickly became too great. Reports suggest that after nearly 5 hours of harassment, the Dutch frigate ultimately withdrew from the area. Not a single direct strike had been fired in the Black Sea, yet the message was unmistakable. Russia was prepared to defend what it considered its territory, even if that meant confronting some of NATO's most capable warships. But even if those were the rules of the game, Britain was ready to play. Only a couple of days after the tense face-off between HMS Defender and the Russians had taken place, a mysterious set of documents appeared on a bus stop somewhere in Kent. The civilian who found them must not have believed their eyes, because those papers contained a detailed and classified Ministry of Defense analysis of the very operation that had just unfolded. Inside, it was clearly stated that while the patrol near Crimea was not intended to directly engage with Russia, officials already understood what the mission would likely provoke. One passage read, quote, "Following the transition from defense engagement activity to operational activity, it's highly likely that Russian Navy and Russian Air Force interactions will become more frequent and assertive." In other words, the British knew HMS Defender's patrol would be risky, yet they felt they had little choice but to commit. Backing down would have risked making the country appear scared, perhaps even suggesting that Britain was quietly conceding Crimea to Russia. So while no other encounter between the two nations has reached quite that same level of tension since the 2021 incident, the rules of engagement now appear to be set. Britain has shown it's willing to carry out high-stakes maneuvers in contested waters. And even more importantly, it's already preparing to deploy something even more formidable than Defender. At the moment, the Royal Navy's next-gen destroyer, the Type 83, is expected to arrive sometime in the next decade. While many of the exact technical details remain classified, early projections suggest Britain's future Sea Warrior could carry as many as 128 integrated air and missile defense launch shells, deploy directed energy weapons capable of disabling enemy systems at range, and even incorporate AI-assisted battle management to optimize its combat capabilities. And when that new warship finally enters service, there's no guarantee it will show the same restraint the next time British sailors encounter a Russian vessel at sea.